My name is Emily, and today I want to talk about a simple idea that can completely change the way many men build connections with women, especially as they grow older and begin to value deeper communication over surface-level interactions. What makes this idea so interesting is that it has almost nothing to do with money, appearance, or memorizing clever lines from the internet. A lot of people assume that attraction is mostly about physical looks or status. But after spending many years observing social interactions, at gatherings, professional events, and everyday conversations, I noticed a pattern that surprised me. The men who naturally stand out are not always the most stylish or the most financially successful. Instead, they are often the ones who communicate their thoughts clearly and sincerely. Let me share a story to explain what I mean. A few years ago, I attended a small networking event in Austin, Texas. The event took place in a relaxed cafe that often hosted community gatherings for young professionals. There were about 20 people there, most of them in their late 20s or early 40s, casually talking while enjoying coffee and light snacks. Among the attendees was a man named Daniel. Daniel was 37 and worked as an urban planner for the city. If you saw him from across the room, you probably wouldn't immediately think he was the most charismatic person there. He dressed simply, dark jeans, a light blue shirt, and a jacket. Nothing flashy or particularly attention-grabbing. But something interesting happened as the evening went on. Another guest at the event was a woman named Rachel. Rachel was 34 and worked as a graphic designer. She had recently moved to Austin from Chicago and was attending the event to meet new people and learn more about the local creative community. Throughout the evening, several men approached Rachel to start conversations. Some tried to impress her by talking about their careers in great detail. Others attempted jokes or playful comments they had probably heard in advice videos online. Rachel responded politely to everyone, but her reactions were calm and reserved. Later in the evening, Daniel happened to sit next to her at a long wooden table where people were discussing travel and hobbies. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't try to tell an exaggerated story or make a dramatic impression. Instead, he simply asked Rachel a thoughtful question. He mentioned that he heard she had moved from Chicago and asked what inspired her to choose Austin as her new home. His tone was relaxed and curious, and he listened carefully as she explained that she had always been interested in the city's creative culture and warmer climate. What made the moment different was how Daniel responded. Rather than rushing to talk about himself, he acknowledged what she said and shared a short story about how he had moved to Austin years earlier for similar reasons. His response was direct and genuine. He didn't try to sound overly impressive or overly cautious. He simply spoke with clarity. As the conversation continued, Rachel became noticeably more engaged. She began sharing more about her design projects, the challenges of moving to a new city, and the excitement of starting a new chapter in life. From the outside, their interaction looked very simple. They were just two people having a conversation over coffee. But if you paid close attention, you could see an important difference between this interaction and the others that happened earlier in the evening. Daniel communicated his ideas clearly and confidently without trying too hard to impress anyone. His tone suggested that he was comfortable expressing his thoughts openly, which created a relaxed and natural atmosphere for the conversation. Many people underestimate how powerful this type of communication can be. In everyday situations, it's common for people to hide their real intentions behind vague phrases. They might say things like, "Maybe we could hang out sometime if you're interested," or, "I'm not sure if you'd enjoy this idea." These kinds of statements often come from uncertainty or fear of rejection. However, when someone communicates their thoughts directly and respectfully, the message feels very different. It shows that the person understands their own intentions and is comfortable sharing them. Clarity in communication often creates a sense of trust. Later in the evening, the conversation between Daniel and Rachel naturally expanded to include topics like favorite restaurants in Austin, weekend hiking spots, and books they both enjoyed reading. At one point, Rachel made an interesting comment. She said that she appreciated conversations where people spoke honestly instead of trying to impress others with rehearsed stories. That moment highlighted something important. People usually remember how a conversation made them feel more than the exact words that were spoken. When someone communicates with sincerity and attentiveness, the interaction tends to feel more meaningful. Daniel wasn't following a complicated strategy that evening. He simply approached the conversation with curiosity and honesty. Yet that approach created a stronger impression than many of the louder attempts happening earlier in the event. A few weeks later, I happened to see both Daniel and Rachel again at another community gathering. By then, they had continued talking occasionally and had built a friendly connection. Their conversations were still simple and relaxed, but there was a clear sense of familiarity between them. Looking back at that first meeting in the cafe, it became clear why their interaction stood out. It wasn't about impressive lines, flashy confidence, or trying to dominate the conversation. It was about clear communication, genuine curiosity, and the willingness to be authentic. In many social situations, people believe they need complicated techniques or extraordinary qualities to stand out. But often the real difference comes from something much simpler: being honest about what you think and listening carefully to others. When someone communicates in that way, conversations feel less like performances and more like meaningful exchanges between two people. And over time, those kinds of conversations are the ones that people tend to remember the most. So if there's one idea to take away from this story, it's this: focus less on saying the perfect line and more on communicating clearly and sincerely. Be present in the conversation. Speak with calm confidence. Listen carefully to what the other person is saying. Sometimes the most powerful connection begins with something very simple: two people having a genuine conversation. Let's continue with another important idea about communication that many people overlook. Earlier, I talked about how clear and honest conversation can make someone stand out in social situations. Now I want to focus on a very specific part of communication: expressing intention clearly. In many interactions, especially when people are meeting someone they find interesting, there is often a lot of hesitation. People worry about saying the wrong thing, appearing too forward, or being misunderstood. Because of that, they often speak in ways that are indirect or overly cautious. But interestingly, those vague expressions can sometimes create confusion rather than comfort. Let me tell you about someone named Michael. Michael is 41 and lives in Denver, Colorado. He works as a landscape architect and spends most of his time designing public parks and outdoor spaces. He's thoughtful, calm, and generally not the type of person who seeks attention in a crowd. For many years, Michael noticed something about his conversations when meeting new people. When he wanted to invite someone to join him for coffee or a walk in the park, he often used very uncertain language. He would say things like, "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime if you're free," or, "I don't know if you'd be interested, but maybe we could check out that art fair one day." While those sentences sounded polite, they also carried a tone of hesitation. Sometimes the other person didn't know how serious he was or whether he truly meant the invitation. One evening, Michael attended a small community workshop about urban gardening. The event was held at a neighborhood community center, and about 15 people gathered to learn about sustainable planting techniques. Among the participants was a woman named Olivia. Olivia was 36 and worked as a middle school teacher. She enjoyed outdoor activities and had recently started volunteering at a local garden project. During a break in the workshop, people began chatting in small groups. Michael and Olivia ended up discussing the challenges of growing vegetables in Colorado's unpredictable weather. Their conversation was relaxed and engaging. They talked about hiking trails, favorite farmers markets, and the difference between gardening in the city versus rural areas. As the event was coming to an end, Michael remembered something he had recently been working on. A small botanical garden downtown was hosting a weekend exhibit featuring native plants from the region. In the past, he might have said something like, "Maybe we could check it out sometime if you're interested." But this time, he decided to try something different. He simply said, "I'd like to visit the botanical exhibit downtown this Saturday afternoon. Supposed to be really interesting. I'd enjoy going with you if you're available." Notice the difference in tone. Instead of sounding uncertain, his words communicated a clear intention. He wasn't demanding or pressuring anyone. He was simply expressing what he wanted to do and offering the opportunity to share the experience. Olivia paused for a moment and smiled. "That actually sounds great," she replied. "I've been meaning to see that exhibit." What made the invitation effective wasn't just the activity itself. It was the clarity behind the message. When someone communicates their intentions directly, it often creates a sense of confidence and direction. The other person doesn't have to guess what is being suggested or wonder whether the invitation is genuine. This kind of communication also shows that someone is comfortable taking initiative. Rather than leaving every decision up to the other person, they are willing to propose an idea and see how the other person responds. It's important to understand that expressing intention clearly is not the same as being aggressive or controlling. There is a big difference between respectful confidence and pressure. Michael wasn't insisting that Olivia say yes. He simply shared what he wanted to do and invited her to join if she felt the same way. That balance is what makes clear communication feel comfortable instead of overwhelming. Many people struggle with this because they believe being direct might come across as rude or too strong. But when the tone is respectful and the intention is genuine, direct communication often feels refreshing. Think about how many conversations involve uncertainty. People say things like maybe, sometime, or if you want. While those phrases are polite, they can sometimes make the message feel less meaningful. On the other hand, when someone calmly states their intention, the conversation becomes simpler and easier to understand. After their conversation at the workshop, Michael and Olivia met again that Saturday at the Botanical Garden. They spent the afternoon walking through the exhibits, talking about plants, photography, and their favorite travel destinations. The experience was relaxed and enjoyable, largely because the invitation itself had been clear from the beginning. Looking back, Michael realized that the small shift in how he expressed his ideas made a noticeable difference. Instead of hiding behind uncertainty, he allowed himself to communicate what he genuinely wanted to do. And that simple change created a more natural and confident interaction. Clear communication does not require complicated techniques. Often it's just about replacing vague language with honest intention. When someone speaks in that way, conversations feel more grounded and authentic. People appreciate knowing where they stand, and clarity often removes the awkward guessing that can happen in social situations. So if there is one lesson to take from Michael's story, it's this. Expressing what you want in a calm and respectful way can make interactions much smoother. You don't need dramatic words or perfect timing. Sometimes all it takes is the confidence to say what you truly mean, and the openness to see how the other person responds. That simple shift can change the entire tone of a conversation. Now let's talk about the second idea that often changes the tone of a conversation in a very meaningful way. Earlier, we discussed how expressing what you want clearly can make communication feel confident and straightforward. But if someone only talks about what they want without showing appreciation for the other person, the interaction can start to feel one-sided. That is why the second part of balanced communication is just as important. Expressing genuine appreciation. Let me explain this through another story. A few years ago, a friend of mine named David was living in Seattle. David was 39 and worked as a software engineer at a mid-sized technology company. He was thoughtful and hardworking, but he often struggled with social conversations because he worried about saying the wrong thing. David had learned to express his ideas more clearly over time. He became comfortable suggesting activities or sharing his plans instead of speaking in vague ways. However, he eventually realized that something was still missing from many of his conversations. He could communicate what he wanted to do, but he didn't always communicate why he enjoyed spending time with someone. One weekend, David attended a local book club meeting at a neighborhood cafe. The group met once a month to discuss novels and share different perspectives about the stories they read. That evening, the group was discussing a historical fiction novel set during the early 20th century. Among the members was a woman named Laura, a 35-year-old high school history teacher who had recently joined the club. Laura had a thoughtful way of speaking. When she shared her opinions about the book, she connected the story's themes to real historical events and explained how literature often reflects social changes in subtle ways. David found her perspective fascinating. After the meeting ended, several members stayed behind to continue chatting over coffee. David and Laura happened to sit at the same table, while others discussed travel and weekend plans. At one point, David mentioned that he was planning to visit a small independent bookstore downtown the following weekend. The store was hosting an event featuring local authors, and he thought it would be interesting to attend. He then said something simple but important. "I'm planning to stop by that bookstore event on Saturday," he said. "I'd enjoy going with you if you'd like to join." Laura smiled and said she might be interested. But instead of ending the conversation there, David added something else. "I also wanted to say that I really appreciated your perspective during the discussion tonight. he said. The way you connected the novel to real historical events made the conversation much more interesting. The comment caught her attention in a positive way. It wasn't a generic compliment. It wasn't about appearance or something superficial. Instead, it acknowledged something meaningful about how she contributed to the conversation. Laura laughed softly and said, "Thank you. I'm always excited when books open up conversations about history. What happened in that moment might seem small, but it illustrates something important about communication. When people feel that their thoughts, ideas, or personality are genuinely appreciated, they often feel more comfortable and open in conversation. Appreciation signals that someone is paying attention, not just to the surface details, but to the deeper qualities that make a person unique. Many people fall into the habit of giving very general compliments that don't carry much meaning. Phrases like "you're nice" or "that's cool" can sound polite, but they often lack depth. On the other hand, when appreciation is specific and sincere, it shows that someone truly noticed something about the other person. In David's case, his comment highlighted Laura's thoughtful approach to literature and history. It acknowledged something she cared about and valued. Over the next few minutes, their conversation naturally expanded. They talked about their favorite authors, the role of storytelling in shaping cultural memory, and how reading habits had changed with the rise of digital media. The atmosphere felt comfortable because the interaction was balanced. David had expressed his intention clearly by inviting her to the bookstore event. But he also expressed appreciation for who she was as a person. That combination made the conversation feel genuine rather than transactional. Later that week, Laura sent a message confirming that she would join him at the bookstore event. They spent the afternoon browsing shelves, listening to a short author talk, and discussing the books they discovered. Looking back, David realized that appreciation played an important role in making the interaction feel natural and memorable. It showed that he valued the conversation itself, not just the activity they might do together. And this highlights an important principle. When appreciation is genuine, it communicates respect and attentiveness. It shows that someone is not simply focused on their own goals, but also recognizes the qualities that make the other person interesting and unique. People tend to remember those moments because they create a sense of being understood. Of course, appreciation must always be sincere. If someone uses praise in a mechanical or exaggerated way, it can feel forced. But when the words reflect real observation and genuine respect, they can strengthen a conversation in a meaningful way. Balanced communication often includes both elements, expressing intention and expressing appreciation. One shows direction, the other shows awareness. Together, they create interactions that feel both confident and thoughtful. And in many situations, that balance is what transforms an ordinary conversation into a memorable one. There is one more important detail that often determines whether a conversation truly leaves an impression or simply fades away. Up to this point, we have talked about expressing intentions clearly and showing genuine appreciation. Both of those elements can create meaningful interactions. However, there is another factor that quietly influences how those words are received. That factor is authenticity. In communication, authenticity means that your words, your tone of voice, and your body language all support the same message. When these elements are aligned, people tend to trust what they hear. But when they are inconsistent, the message can feel uncertain. Let me share one more story that illustrates this idea. A man named Robert lived in Portland, Oregon. Robert was 42 and worked as an interior designer. He was creative, thoughtful, and well-respected by his clients. In professional settings, he communicated with clarity and confidence. But in personal conversations, especially when meeting someone new, he sometimes felt nervous. When he tried to express his thoughts, his words sounded confident, but his posture and tone sometimes told a different story. One evening, Robert attended a small art exhibition hosted at a local gallery. The event featured paintings from several emerging artists in the region, and the atmosphere was relaxed and friendly. Guests walked around the room discussing the artwork while soft music played in the background. While looking at a landscape painting near the back of the gallery, Robert met a woman named Hannah. Hannah was 38 and worked as a freelance photographer. She had come to the event because she often collaborated with artists and enjoyed supporting local creative communities. They began talking about the painting in front of them. Hannah pointed out how the artist used light and shadow to create a peaceful atmosphere in the scene. Robert agreed and shared his perspective from a design standpoint. Their conversation flowed easily, and they soon began discussing other pieces in the gallery. After about 20 minutes, Robert thought about suggesting that they continue the conversation another time. Earlier in the week, he had read about a weekend art fair happening downtown that featured both painters and photographers. He wanted to invite Hannah to visit the fair together. So he said, "I'm planning to check out the art fair downtown this weekend. I'd really enjoy going with you if you're interested." The words themselves were clear and respectful, but there was something slightly off about the way he said them. As he spoke, Robert looked briefly toward the floor, his shoulders slightly tense. His voice softened at the end of the sentence as if he wasn't entirely sure about the invitation. Hannah responded politely and said it sounded interesting, but she mentioned that she would need to check her schedule. Later that evening, Robert reflected on the moment. The invitation itself was fine. The words were straightforward and thoughtful, but his body language had not fully supported what he was saying. He realized that people often respond not only to the words they hear, but also to the signals they see. The next time he attended a gallery event a few weeks later, he kept this idea in mind. Coincidentally, he saw Hannah again at the same venue. They greeted each other warmly and continued talking about photography and design. Toward the end of the evening, Robert remembered another upcoming event, a small outdoor photography exhibit happening at a local park the following Saturday. This time, when he mentioned it, he paused for a moment and spoke calmly. "I'm planning to visit the photography exhibit in Riverside Park this Saturday afternoon," he said. "I'd enjoy going with you if you'd like to join." As he spoke, he maintained comfortable eye contact and stood naturally with relaxed shoulders. His tone sounded steady, not rushed or uncertain. Hannah smiled. "That sounds like a great idea," she said. "I've actually been wanting to see that exhibit." The difference between the two invitations was subtle, but meaningful. In both cases, the words were similar. The intention was the same. But the second time, his tone and posture matched the message he was expressing. This alignment created a sense of authenticity. People are often very sensitive to these signals, even if they don't consciously analyze them. When someone speaks with calm confidence and sincerity, the message tends to feel more trustworthy. Another important aspect of communication is timing. Not every moment is the right moment to express certain thoughts. Effective communication often depends on recognizing when the atmosphere of a conversation feels natural and relaxed. For example, Robert did not interrupt a busy group discussion to make his invitation. Instead, he waited until the conversation naturally slowed down and both of them were reflecting on the evening's artwork. By choosing the right moment, the invitation felt like a natural extension of their conversation, rather than a sudden change of direction. Timing, tone, and body language may seem like small details, but together they shape how messages are understood. Clear words can open the door to meaningful interactions. Appreciation can make people feel seen and valued. And authenticity ensures that those messages are delivered with sincerity. When all three elements come together, conversations often feel more memorable and genuine. In many ways, effective communication is not about perfection. It's about alignment, making sure that your intentions, your words, and your presence all reflect the same honest message. People respond positively when they sense that someone is comfortable being themselves. And sometimes the most powerful impression comes from something very simple. Speaking clearly, showing appreciation, and allowing your natural confidence to support your words. Those small choices can transform ordinary conversations into meaningful connections. And often, that is what people remember long after the conversation ends.